on technical parts. Like you gave the term POSIX.
Yes.
And that unites all Unix-like systems.
Right.
Based on the
well, actually,
Unix.
It's an interface specification,
yeah.
and the system doesn't have to be Unix-like underneath to support this interface.
Yeah. So that's
but on the other hand, we could call it Unix-like if its interfaces are these.
Yeah. So in the similar terms, based on Unix, there's a POSIX specification. Based on GPL, can we see a unified public license?
I'm sorry, that's meaningless. The GNU General Public License is not an interface.
No, I'm just...
It's a license. These are totally different issues. You can't generalize from one to the other. A license is the legal... If we try to make an analogy between law and programming, a license would correspond to a program. Now, of course, there's a lot of difference between a license and a program. A license is interpreted by human judges, not by a computer. But still, it's something you write to do a job. So in that sense, it's a bit like a program. But, and therefore, it's not like an interface spec. Those are not analogous at all. There can't be a unified license because the different licenses are different and they have different requirements that conflict with each other. So the only way all free software would use one license is if all the developers chose to put all their software under that same one license. It doesn't look likely that that's going to happen in the near future.
So the public licenses are ever growing. So where do you see the end of the number of public licenses?
I don't know.
So
I don't see the future. I would encourage you not to write another license, but instead to use the GNU General Public License.
Exactly.
But I can't tell you what to do, right?
There is IETF, Engineering Task Force. The RFCs are there which are open. And there is IEEE, there is ITU-T.
I don't know about that.
So the telecom, the International Telecommunication Union.
I don't know what they do.
Every standard is closed. You have to buy them. IETF is open.
I don't like these terms open and closed.
Yeah.
But it's true that there are many standards organizations that do not publish their documentation in a way that's available to everyone. And even the ones that do publish it usually don't permit people to modify the spec and turn it into a manual, which they should permit.
Yeah.
Well, that's wrong. I think that standards should be published under the GNU Free Documentation License. I put something into the GNU Free Documentation License specifically to serve this purpose, because a standards organization wants it to be clear what is the standard and what is not. So they can, with the GFDL, they can put a section into the spec which says what you're reading here is the official standard, and if you make a modified version, you have to delete this. So the modified version will not say it's the official standard. The modified version will only say this is a modified version of that other document, which is the standard. And so this way, it avoids confusion about which document is the standard.
Yeah. So in the embedded systems, in 80s when embedded systems came to MIT AI Lab, the free software...
80s what?
In 1980s, I have read your documentation that the embedded systems came into the place. MIT
I don't know. That's not what I said. I didn't talk about embedded systems.
So what is the future of the free software in the embedded systems?
Well, in some cases it doesn't matter. Consider, for instance, a microwave oven. I have a microwave oven.
Yeah.
I don't know whether there's a computer in that. I don't know whether there's a program in that. I can't tell.
Yeah.
What I do know is, if it's a computer, users don't install software on it. So, since we can't tell whether it's a computer, that means it makes no difference to us. And so, I don't care whether it's a computer. I don't care whether the software on that is free software or not, if it's a computer, because it's not doing the job of a computer for me, the user. This is an issue that I had to think about back in the 80s. I had to decide where to draw this line, and my conclusion is, when the computer is embedded in something and people don't generally install software in it, then the job it's doing is not that of being a computer, and therefore we don't have to care what goes on inside it. It can still do good and bad things, but it doesn't matter whether it's a program or a circuit that does them. However, once users start installing software, once that becomes part of its normal function, then it must be free software, or else we don't control our computing that we do.
So is there some concept of free hardware also?
No. And the reason is that these four freedoms that define free software, they're not really an issue for hardware. Because, well, if you look at freedoms 0 and 1, the freedom to run the program as you wish and the freedom to study and change the source code, for hardware that would become the freedom to use the object as you wish and the freedom to study and change the object. And in general, for hardware, manufacturers do not restrict this. So you have these freedoms to the extent that it is possible. And then when you look at freedoms 2 and 3, which involve copying and distribution of copies, for the most part, it's just impossible. There are no copiers. Therefore, these questions don't even matter. Now, there may be some cases where they matter, exceptions. I'm told, for instance, that in India, it's cheap to get somebody to make a chair for you. In fact, it's cheaper than buying a mass-produced chair. So, in India, I think the freedom to copy a chair is important. But in the U.S., to pay somebody to make a copy of a chair would be so ridiculously expensive that only rich people would even think of the idea. The rest of us, we just assume, you want a chair, you go buy one. That's the only way to have one.
What is your stand for people who use GPL, like Linus Torvalds, and they say we have a new movement called open source movement. Someday some other person will also use GPL and say we have some other kind of movement.
Well,
They
have the freedom to think what they wish and to state their opinions. I respect their freedom of expression. But I disagree with their views. They have missed the point ethically. Because while some of them use, of course, not all free software is under the GNU GPL. There are other free software licenses. But the point is that when they say open source, it's because they don't want to talk about freedom. So I think they're making a mistake. So at this point, we need to...
So I want your blessings for our GNU Linux user group Merit and my students who are working day and night on free software.
Well, I'm very glad that they're doing this.
Yeah,
Thank you for contributing to the movement.
Thanks a lot.